Well, this presentation is a focus on feeding cull cows. Non-fed beef contributes more to the industry than just ground beef. Whole muscle products are marketed in family-type steakhouses. Also, roast beef sandwiches. Think about something that is tough. If you cut it very thin, that increases the tenderness, and that is kind of a Philly steak. Cull cows and bulls, non-fed beef makes up approximately 25% of all the beef consumed in the United States. And I'm including dairy here as well. Cull dairy cows make up about a half of the 75% of the domestic non-fed beef coming from cull cows. So the average dairy farmer, though, receives only about 5% of his or her income from the sale of cull cows. Kind of focus here on what to feed and what not to feed. Earlier culling will assist for people who want to feed cull cows. We don't want animals put on feed that are in poor shape. So certainly a physical exam should be considered on all those cows we're considering looking at. None of these animals right here are candidates for being fed out. They can't get up. They may have a crippled walk, excessively long hooves, some sort of foot infection or leg swellings. Just overall, the skin looks rough, maybe ringworm. Those are not ideal candidates for feeding out. And certainly these non-ambulatory cattle, well, they can't be taken to the packing plant. And even it mentions here, it's a good sign for this cow. She's able to get up on her leg or starting to set up. Hopefully she's going to get better and she can get up, but even then she's probably better off being sent directly to the packing plant versus being a candidate for being fed out any further. So factor one, cows should be thin but healthy. Young, thin cows offer the opportunity to add weight rapidly through compensatory gain. Healthy, thin cows gain weight faster than normal conditioned cows. So you don't want to put on a cow that's very, very fat, even though she's healthy. So compensatory gain comes from thin cows should result in the highest conversion rate and gain and reduce the cost of gain. Now, I have pictures here of dairy cows, but they have a 5-point locomotion score, and in beef, and we're talking probably about steers, it's 1 to 3. But we're feeding about cull cows, so this scoring system, I think, works better in evaluating cows. So locomotion scoring, you want that back to be straight, horizontal when they walk. The more leg problems they have, that back is going to arch a little bit more. Certainly you might be able to see a limp. So the number one is a normal walk here on the top. Locomotion score of a 2. That's an animal. She can walk with the herd. Maybe it's a minor bruise, whatever, but she can walk with the herd, but you're going to notice she has a limp. Now these 3 cows, much more of a limp, and they may fall behind when that animal is walking compared to the other cows in the group. 4s, much more pronounced arched back, much more pronounced limp, and a 5, a very pronounced arched back, very noticeable limp. There you see, even let's say the dairy producer has this cow, a reduction of 30% loss in milk production. Where I'm going with this is maybe those 1s and maybe the 2s are the cattle we might think about. This animal, the loss in milk production, we can expect we're not getting the gain that we would want to as well. So some of those 3s, 4s, and 5s wouldn't be the ideal candidates for finishing out. Obviously, an animal like this wouldn't be a candidate for being fed out. The mammary system needs to be intact, even though we're not going to be milking. Look at the eyes. There may be other anatomical features. This animal up here in the upper left-hand corner probably can go to the packing plant, even though this eye is in relatively bad shape. What I wouldn't want to do is take a cow that had an eye like that in the left or left-hand corner and feed her out. this animal on the lower right-hand side, it'll probably be condemned by the packing plant. So that you want a healthy, thin animal that you're going to feed out. Where do humans put on weight? Well, it's not exactly the same places the cattle do, and this is not going to be an extensive discussion of thin versus fat. Here's just some of the places you would look to see whether an animal is thin or fat. And percentage price increases change with grade. So looking at cutter, utility, commercial, as we move along here, we can expect a higher price when the animals are sold for actual meat production. This is just showing some data of some cows that were fed shelled corn and corn silage and the days on feed. So 0 days on feed, we had 64% canners, 28% cutters, 8% utility, and no commercials. The longer we went on feed, the number increased. Maybe not drastically in commercial, 1.6, and actually that's a 7%. But look over here at utility, how we improved from this canner level and even the cutter level over into at least utility, so we can expect higher prices. So to enhance market cow value by feeding an extra, say, 60 to 100 a days, should be a benefit. We're going to increase the amount of white fat or increase that fat grade the longer they're on feed. These cull cow prices, based on expected USDA carcass grade, very thin. They're those canners, whereas we get up to these fleshier body condition, we can expect more commercial or utility type cattle. Another factor is the buy-sell margin. Most cows are culled in the fall of the year at weaning time, so they're usually worth less per pound than at other times of the year. Prices usually rise from fall selling period of October, December into the winter months and spring periods. Prices peak in March, May, but we have to think about days on feed as well. So this is just showing the number of market cattle, means slaughter, but cull cow slaughter. So notice the number increases here in the fall as we go into that period. So that they're worth less per pound then, whereas we get a little bit increase here. So we may play off days on feed versus times of the year when we're feeding out cows. Feeding cull cows a grain-based diet for only 30 days will result in probably the most rapid and efficient gains. However, the producer is really subject to short-term price changes. That's not a lot of time for a price to change. So we might feed longer than that, but once again, we have to decide how long a feed we can handle it. But you're very exposed with relatively short ownership of cattle. That applies to cull cows, backgrounding, and even stocker cattle. So cull cows require more nutrient-dense ration. Drake suggests smaller particle size and softer feed. Could be, although if we're feeding relatively young, thin, healthy cattle, I'm not sure we have to be that specialized. Cull cows do have lower feed efficiency, lower digestion than, say, compared a younger animal like a market steer. Occasionally get the question about, can we put cull cows on self-feeders? There hasn't been a lot of research, at least being done, on using self-feeders and cull cows in research. So Iowa State data suggests feed the cull cow for 60 to 90 days to obtain a whiter fat anyway. Relatively favorable gains, 3.8 pounds per day for these young, thin, healthy cows. This is going to vary from year to year, the total feed cost, but conversions maybe of 10 to 1. A market steer, maybe it's 8 to 1, but so not terrible if we hold in here. Now, let's say we fed those cows for another 100 days. That feed efficiency is going to move drastically down. There are some people, maybe they've got free pasture and they you've got time, you maybe put some cows out there for long periods of time, but you keep in mind that you're still owning that animal for a longer period of time. So consider maybe even an aggressive implant program, even like a terminal implant like Uniplex H, something, or some other high potency implant might be considered. Feeding MGA, just read some recent research with heifers, 2019 data, still showing that the feeding of MGA does pay. Probably a minimum of 24 inches of bunk space per cow. Think about the size of these animals, so they probably need more bunk space than, say, some feeder calves. And a high energy finishing diet, high grain diet, finish these animals off that, say, for 100 days. So the money is made from upgrading the cow. They're increasing some weight, but also where she's grading in the grading system. Also, financial solvency. You're owning the cattle for a short-term period. So you're taking a lot of, in relative terms, more risk than, say, somebody that's feeding market from feeder calves from 500 or 600 pounds up to 1,300 pounds. So you're still at the sway of the market in that short shift period, but it can be absorbed. So it can be dependent, it is dependent on initial body condition score. They need to be thin. Days on feed, once again, it's probably 60 to 100 days, and you're going to improve that quality within that time period. There's probably a justification for looking at more research to evaluate other methods to market cull cows.